They told me roses couldn't grow here. Too hot. Too dry. Too stubborn. They meant the land. I think maybe they meant me too. The December morning I saw the first buds forming. I'd been alone exactly 1 year. 1 year since the mine collapse took Thomas and left me with a house that echoed and a silence that felt like drowning. The preacher said time heals all wounds. I say time plus purpose keeps you from drowning in that silence. I spent the year measuring my days and watering schedules. Morning meant I had to get up, carry the heavy bucket from the well, tend each plant with careful hands. Evening meant I'd survived another day, checking soil moisture with my fingers the way Thomas used to check fence posts, methodical, thorough, present. The town women stopped visiting after the first month. They'd already decided what my grief should look like. And apparently, my dirty fingernails weren't it. When did I start counting his footsteps? When did I begin talking to roses instead of people? The desert fought me on everything. Wind stole moisture before roots could drink. Sun burned exposed leaves until they crisp brown. Animals dug where they shouldn't, looking for water, for anything soft in this hard land. I learned to fight back with shade cloth stretched on careful frames, mulching that kept precious water close to roots, and stubborn determination that was all I had left of myself that felt familiar. Thomas used to laugh at my stubbornness, called it my Missouri mule disposition, said it with affection, his calloused hand touching my cheek in the lamplight. Now that stubbornness was all I had that still felt like me. The rest of Alma, the laughing one, the hopeful one. The woman who believed in futures, she was buried with him in the cemetery on the hill. By November, I had 12 rose bushes, spindly, hesitant things that looked half dead most days. Everyone said they'd never bloom. Too harsh, too unforgiving, too much to ask of this land. I didn't plant them for blooming. I planted them for surviving, for having something alive to tend when everything inside me felt dead. The week before Christmas, every single bush decided to prove everyone wrong. I stood in my garden at dawn, December cold biting my fingers, looking at tight buds forming on every plant, deep red ones, the color of promises kept impossible color in impossible place. I actually laughed. First real sound of joy I'd made in 12 months, and it startled me with its unfamiliarity. Something impossible was about to happen. I wasn't sure I was ready for it. That's when I heard the horse stop at my gate. That's when I looked up and saw him watching. That's when everything I'd carefully built started to crack. The stranger sat his horse like a man used to long trails. Dusty coat, weathered hat, the kind of lean hardness that came from ranch work and sleeping rough. But he removed his hat before speaking. That detail caught me off guard. "Ma'am," he said, "those roses. May I see them up close?" I should have said no. Should have protected my space, my grief, my carefully maintained isolation. But something about how he asked, like he was requesting entry to church. Not some widow's yard, made me nod before I could think better of it. He dismounted slow, tied his horse to the fence post I'd been meaning to fix for 6 months, walked through the garden like a man in a gallery, touching nothing, just looking. Really looking. Other visitors back when I still had visitors had asked how I did it, what my secret was. Could I show them my technique? This man asked different questions. "What made you try?" he said, studying the blooms. Needed something to care for. The words came out more honest than I'd planned. I hated how vulnerable that sounded. I understand that. He had that look. The one other widowed women recognized across crowded rooms, across distances, across the careful walls people build. Loss sitting behind the eyes like a permanent resident. I wondered when I'd learn to spot grief in strangers. when I'd become fluent in that particular language. Lost my wife to fever last January. He said, been drifting since. Working ranches, moving on, never staying. Saw your roses from the road. They stopped me. January. Same month Thomas died. Same fresh wound. Same raw edges. We stood there in the December cold. Two people who understood things they'd rather not understand. You know anything about winterizing gardens? I heard myself ask. Say no, I thought. Say no and leave. Keep me safe. Some, he said. Learned it back in Missouri before I came west. Missouri? Thomas had been from Missouri. This conversation was full of ghosts I hadn't invited. Garden this size needs winterizing before hard freeze. I said, works more than I can manage alone. He looked at me careful, like he was checking if I meant it, making sure he wasn't presuming. I could stay a few days. Help with that. Just the garden work. I said too sharp, too defensive. Protecting something I wasn't sure needed protecting. Just the garden, ma'am. His eyes understood more than I wanted them to. I should have sent him away. Should have said nice words and shut my gate. Locked my door. Kept my careful solitude intact. Instead, I found myself nodding. Found myself saying he could sleep in the work shed. That I'd provide meals in exchange for labor. Found myself betraying the isolation I'd worked so hard to maintain. When he asked my name, I almost didn't answer. Names felt too personal. Too much like connection. But he waited patient. And finally I said, Alma. Alma Pearson. Joseph Marsh, ma'am. He tipped his hat. I'll start in the morning, if that suits. After he left, I stood in the garden for a long time. The roses bloomed around me, impossible flowers in harsh land. I'd thought I was done with impossible things. Thought I'd learned my lesson about hoping for miracles. But the roses bloomed anyway. Despite my doubts. Despite the desert. I wasn't sure what that meant. We set rules that first evening. Professional distance, clear boundaries. He'd sleep in Thomas's old work shed. I didn't call it Thomas's, but that's what it was. Still smelling of his tobacco and leather. I'd provide meals in exchange for labor. No personal questions. No lingering after dark. I thought rules would protect me. Keep everything simple. Transactional. Safe. I was lying to myself. I'd gotten good at that this year. First morning, I woke to find him already working the north beds, the ones where wind damage was worst. Through my kitchen window, I watched him move among the plants with careful hands. He worked like a man who understood plants weren't just things, but living promises you made to keep tending. I wondered when I'd started watching for him, when his presence became something I noticed. Coffee's ready, I called from the porch, hating how domestic it sounded, like we were something we weren't. He came to the steps but didn't presume to enter. Drank standing, looking at my work with what seemed like genuine respect. You've built something remarkable here, ma'am, in this land. With this loss. That's not small. Nobody had called my garden remarkable, foolish. Yes, waste of water. Certainly, unhealthy obsession, according to Mrs. Hartley and her concerned friends, but not remarkable. It's just roses, I said. No, ma'am. It's proof that stubborn hope can survive killing conditions. Something in my chest cracked. Just a little. Just enough to hurt. I turned away before he could see my face, before I could show him the wound he'd just opened, without meaning to. We should work before the heat gets bad, I said. That became our pattern. Dawn to mid-morning in the garden. Me showing him what each plant needed. Him following instructions with patient competence. Afternoon, I'd work inside while he handled the heavy labor building windbreaks. reinforcing supports, tasks that required strength I didn't have. Evening, we'd both check the plants, barely talking, just being present to the work. I told myself it was just help, temporary. Practical arrangement that would end when the winterizing finished. But when he asked which plants mattered most, which ones I'd save if I could only save some, I found myself answering with stories. This one from Thomas's mother's farm back in Missouri. She gave me cuttings when we married. Said roses mean you're putting down roots, building something permanent. My throat tightened. That one from the first spring after we moved here, Thomas bought it from a traveling merchant. Said every woman deserved something beautiful to look at while her man was underground. I stopped, swallowed hard. The white one I planted the week after I buried him. Needed to put something in the ground that wasn't him. Joseph listened, like my stories were worth hearing. Like I was worth hearing. Like my past mattered instead of threatening him. That scared me more than the loneliness had. On the third evening, I set 2 coffee cups on the table without thinking, then stood there, staring at them. 2 cups, like before. Like I was already replacing Thomas, erasing him, moving on too fast, dishonoring everything we'd built. You all right? Ma'am, Joseph's voice from the doorway. Fine. I lied, but my hands shook. We ate at opposite ends of the table that night, maintained our careful distance. But I noticed he complimented the biscuits, something Thomas used to do, and when he laughed at my sarcastic comment about the persistent cactus wren. The sound filled my small house in a way I'd forgotten houses could be filled. That night, I lay awake, listening to the silence that wasn't quite silent anymore, listening to the sound of someone else breathing on my property, someone else existing in my carefully maintained solitude. I should have been afraid. Should have been guarded, protective, walled. Instead, I felt something dangerous. Something that felt almost like relief. The third day, I started noticing things. The way he'd fixed the gate hinge I'd been meaning to repair for 6 months. How he saved damaged branches I'd have thrown away, showing me how to propagate new starts from them. How nothing had to be wasted if you knew how to be patient. The careful way he asked permission before moving anything, respecting that this was my space, my domain, my carefully built sanctuary. He worked in comfortable silence. Not the awkward emptiness that needed filling with meaningless words, but something deeper. Peaceful coexistence. The kind of silence Thomas and I used to share. Working side by side in the early days when the house was new and our dreams still felt possible. I'd forgotten how that felt. How companionship could exist without demands. Days passed. 3. Then 4. I stopped counting them the way I'd counted the grief days. Started counting other things instead. How many times he smiled while working. How many times I caught myself watching him. How many times I forgot to be afraid. Setting lunch that 4th day, I put out 2 plates without the panic this time. Just did it. Natural as breathing. I stood there holding the 2nd plate, trying to remember when it had become normal. When I'd stopped flinching at domestic routine, memory hit me sudden and sharp Thomas at this same table, his calloused hand reaching for the bread, flour dusting his shirt from helping me in the kitchen, him laughing at some joke I can't remember now, the ease of it, the simple dailiness of love. Joseph wasn't Thomas, would never be Thomas, but maybe that was the point. Maybe hearts didn't replace. Maybe they just made room. You're thinking loud today, Joseph said from the doorway, making me jump. Sorry, just remembering. Nothing to apologize for. He came in slow, taking his seat at the opposite end of the table. The distance we maintained, my Ellen used to make biscuits just like these. Took me a year before I could eat them again without crying. Silence stretched between us. Not uncomfortable, just honest. How'd you manage it? I asked finally. Eating biscuits again. Decided she'd want me to remember the joy, not just the loss. That took a while to learn. Still learning it. Most days. I set the plate down careful. The roses were his idea. Thomas wanted something pretty for me to look at while he was in the mines. We started them together. Planted the first ones, the spring before he died. My voice cracked. He never saw them bloom. He'd be proud of what you've done. Or think I'm foolish. Wasting water on flowers. No, ma'am. Joseph looked at me steady. Sure. Man who wanted to give his wife beauty. He'd understand beauty's never wasted. Especially not in hard places. We ate in silence after that. But it was different silence. Waited with things said and things understood without saying. That afternoon, working in the garden, I found myself humming. An old song Thomas used to sing while working. I stopped when I realized, hand flying to my mouth like I'd committed betrayal. But Joseph didn't say anything, just kept working, giving me space to feel whatever I needed to feel. I wondered when I'd started counting his footsteps, when his silence became familiar, when I began to miss it when he rode to town for supplies. Evening, checking the roses together. He said, quiet, "You've done something remarkable here. Alma, not just the garden, the way you've survived." First time he'd used my name. It sounded different in his mouth than in Thomas's. Not better or worse, just different. Surviving isn't the same as living, I said before I could stop myself. No, ma'am, but it's the first step toward it. I looked at him then. Really looked. Saw a man who understood that distinction because he'd lived it himself. A man who'd spent a year drifting because drifting was easier than staying. Easier than facing all the empty spaces a person left behind. Why'd you stop? I asked. When you saw the roses, why'd you really stop? He was quiet a long moment. Because they reminded me that beautiful things can survive harsh conditions. Because I'd forgotten that was possible. He met my eyes. Because maybe I was tired of running. That night, I cried. First time in months. Not the desperate grief anymore. But something softer. Something that felt like ice, cracking in spring thaw. Like something frozen beginning to move again. I didn't know if I was crying for Thomas or for myself. Maybe both. Maybe that was all right. Maybe remembering joy wasn't betrayal. Maybe it was the whole point. The storm hit 3 days before Christmas. Not snow, we rarely got that, but wind, fierce enough to kill. Wind that tore through the valley like something angry. Like something determined to destroy anything foolish enough to try growing in this harsh land. I heard it coming. That particular sound wind makes when it's mean. Ran outside without my coat, desperate to save what I could. The roses. The careful work. The year of stubborn hope made visible. Joseph was already there, fighting to secure the shade cloth before it tore free. Before the frames collapsed and destroyed everything underneath. We worked frantic in the dark, cold wind cutting through our clothes like knives, plants whipping around us. I couldn't feel my fingers. Didn't care. Just kept working. A gust caught the large cloth, yanked it from my hands with force that knocked me back. The frame collapsed, right onto Thomas's original roses, the prize plants, the ones we'd started together. I watched them go down, heard the snap of stems breaking, saw petals scatter across the dirt like blood. I dropped to my knees in the wind, started gathering broken flowers with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. They were just plants, just flowers. Stupid to cry over flowers when I'd lost so much more. But they were all I had left of that last project together. All I had left of us, building something. And now, They were destroyed. And I couldn't fix it. Couldn't save them. Couldn't. Alma. Joseph's hand on my shoulder. First time anyone had touched me in months. First time I'd felt human contact that wasn't accidental. That wasn't distant. That meant something. Alma, come inside. You'll freeze. They're destroyed. I was crying now. Couldn't stop. Everything flooding out at once. Everything I kept alive. It's all destroyed. Not destroyed. His voice was steady in the chaos. Damaged. There's a difference. He helped me stand, gathered the salvageable pieces with careful hands. Come on. We'll fix what we can by the fire. Inside. Wrapped in Thomas's old quilt, I noticed which quilt. Noticed I let Joseph wrap me in it. Noticed I didn't pull away. I watched him work, sorting broken roses with patient competence, arranging some in water, pruning others for propagation. Moving like this was important work. Like saving these flowers mattered. I'm not crying about roses, I said finally. Had to say it. Had to be honest about something. I know. He didn't look up from his work. I didn't cry about Ellen's dresses either. Still had to let myself cry over them. Silence. Just the sound of careful hands working. The crackle of fire. The wind still raging outside. Does it get easier? My voice was small. Smaller than I wanted it to be. Different. He looked at me then. Not easier. But sometimes, when you least expect it, you'll laugh without feeling guilty. You'll make plans past tomorrow. You'll wake up, and grief won't be the first thing you feel. When did that happen for you? His hands stilled. About 3 days ago, when I saw impossible roses blooming in the desert. The air between us changed. Became heavy with unspoken things, with possibilities I wasn't ready to name. Joseph, I know, he said quick. Too soon. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. It's not too soon. The words rushed out. That's what terrifies me. It's been a year, and I'm ready to. I don't know what I'm ready for, but I'm ready for something. And that feels like betrayal. It's not betrayal. He set down the roses, moved closer, not touching, just present. It's life insisting on continuing. But Thomas would want you to live, same way my Ellen would want me to live. He was quiet a moment. We carry them forward. Alma, everything they taught us about love, about building things, about being brave enough to try, that doesn't die with them. It lives in us, makes us capable of recognizing good when we see it again. I'm not crying about roses. I'm crying about everything I've lost, everything I'm afraid to want, everything I'm terrified of ruining by wanting it. But I didn't say that. Just sat there wrapped in my dead husband's quilt, watching another man save my flowers, feeling my carefully built walls crumbling with every kind gesture, every patient moment, every sign that maybe I didn't have to be alone forever. I'm scared, I whispered. Me too. We sat in silence then, drinking coffee, saving roses. Two scared people choosing to stay in the same room instead of running. That felt like progress. Terrifying. Dangerous progress, but progress nonetheless. The town women arrived the day after the storm. I was in the garden, surveying damage, trying to salvage what the wind hadn't destroyed. Joseph had gone to town for supplies. I was alone when they came. Mrs. Hartley led them. 3 other women trailing behind like a righteous parade. Their faces were set with that particular expression I'd learned to recognize concern that wasn't really concern at all, just judgment. wearing a kind mask. "Alma, dear," Mrs. Hartley called from the gate. "We heard you have a man staying here, unchaperoned. You understand how that looks." I stood on my porch, exhausted from storm recovery, cold settling into my bones. Facing their collective disapproval, wanted to send them away, wanted to hide, wanted to protect the small, fragile thing growing between Joseph and me from their harsh scrutiny. But I just stood there, too tired to perform, too raw to pretend. "He's helping winterize my garden," I said, sleeping in the work shed. Nothing improper. A widow alone with a drifter. Mrs. Hartley's voice was sharp. "For nearly a week, Alma, you must think of your reputation. What would Thomas say? That hit like a physical blow, using my dead husband to shame me, using his memory as a weapon against my choices. Thomas would say I'm managing my property as I see fit." My voice came out harder than I meant it. "This is my land. Mrs. Hartley, my decision, who helps on it?" "We're trying to help you, dear." Her smile was thin. "Grief makes women do foolish things. Take in strays. Imagine connections that aren't there. We're worried about you. Get off my property." The words surprised me as much as them. But I meant them. Meant them with everything I had. They left in a rustle of scandalized skirts and whispered judgments. I stood there, shaking, furious, and frightened simultaneously. They were right about one thing I was imagining connections. Feeling things I shouldn't feel. Getting attached to a drifter who'd leave as soon as the work was done. Protecting myself now would hurt less than letting him leave later. When Joseph returned, I was in the garden, attacking the pruning with too much force. Taking my fear out on innocent plants. "You're going to hurt them," he said, gentle. "What happened?" "Nothing. Town gossip. Doesn't matter." "Alma, you should go." The words came out harsh, defensive, protective of something I couldn't name. "Gardens mostly winterized. You've done enough. I can finish the rest alone." He was quiet a long moment. Too long. "That what you want, or what you think you should want." "What's the difference?" "Everything." He moved closer, not touching, never presuming, just present. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. Been drifting a year because staying anywhere meant facing that Ellen was never coming back. Your roses made me stop running. You made me want to stop running. Joseph, I can't. The town already thinks." "I don't give a damn what the town thinks." His voice was firm. "Sure. Question is what you think. What you want. What did I want? I wanted to not be alone. Wanted someone who understood grief without needing explanations. Wanted this man who touched my roses like they mattered. Who asked before presuming. Who saw my strength instead of my weakness. Wanted to stop being afraid all the time. Wanted to believe that wanting something didn't automatically mean losing it. I don't know what I want," I whispered. "That's all right." He stepped back, giving me space. Always giving me space when I needed it. "You don't have to know yet. I'll finish the north windbreak tomorrow. Won't push for more than you're ready to give." He paused. "But I'm not leaving because some busybody thinks she knows your business better than you do. I'm only leaving if you truly want me gone. And if I ask you to stay past the garden work, then I stay. If you ask me to leave after, I leave." He met my eyes. "Your choice. Alma, always your choice." That's what undid me. Not pressure or presumption or demands, but the absolute certainty that my choice mattered, that I had agency in what happened next, that he'd respect whatever I decided. even if it hurt him. The town will talk, I said, quiet. Let them talk. They'll say terrible things. They already do. Doesn't make them true. I looked at him. Really looked. Saw a man who'd stopped running when he saw my roses. Saw someone who understood that grief and joy could coexist. Saw a possibility where I'd only seen endings. Stay through Christmas. I heard myself say, we'll see what happens after. His smile in the fading light felt like sunrise. Christmas Eve. I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about Thomas. About the life we'd planned that never happened. The children we'd talked about having. The roses we'd grow together. The years we'd thought we had. All of it gone in one mind collapse. One moment of the mountain deciding it was done, being patient with men who dug into its bones. About the unfairness of finding someone new when he was barely gone a year. About whether I was dishonoring his memory by even considering this. About whether grief had a proper timeline, or if that was just something people said to make themselves feel better about judging others. I stood in the garden at midnight, looking at the roses we'd planted together. The storm-damaged ones Joseph had saved were already showing new growth. Resilient, stubborn, surviving. The roses didn't ask permission to keep growing. They just did. Why couldn't I do the same? Thought I might find you here. Joseph's voice from the shadows. Not startling me. I'd heard his footsteps. Had been waiting for them. Maybe. Couldn't sleep either. Tomorrow's church service, I said. First Christmas without him. I wasn't planning on going. Figured you'd want to go alone. Privacy for missing him. Why would I want that? He came closer, stopped a careful distance away. Because it's your first Christmas without him. Thought you'd want, I don't know, space to grieve without someone watching. Something in my chest softened. The thoughtfulness of it. The way he'd spent a week understanding things I hadn't said. Working in my garden like it was sacred ground. Giving me space while making clear he wasn't going anywhere unless I asked. I'm terrified, I said into the dark. Had to say it. Had to be honest about something. Terrified I'm replacing him. Terrified I'm not grieving properly. Terrified the town women are, right? I'm just a lonely widow grasping at the first man who showed me kindness. Are you? His voice was gentle. No judgment. Just genuine question. Grasping. I thought about that. Really thought about it. I don't think so. I think you stopped because my roses reminded you that beautiful things can survive harsh conditions. And I think I'm letting you stay because you remind me the same thing about people. That's not grasping. Alma, that's recognizing something real. But what if it's too soon? What if I'm dishonoring his memory by living? He moved closer. Not touching, never touching without permission. By letting yourself feel again. Memory hit sharp and sudden Thomas the morning before the mine collapse. Kissing me goodbye. Telling me not to work too hard on the garden. That he'd help me when he got home. The casual assumption of futures, the certainty of tomorrow. Tomorrow never came. My Ellen died angry that I'd be alone. Joseph said, quiet. Made me promise I'd find someone someday. Took me months to understand she wasn't giving me permission. She was giving me a command. Live. She said, don't you dare waste your life mourning mine. Thomas never said that. Didn't need to. Joseph's voice was sure. Man who wanted to give you roses in a desert. He wanted you to have beautiful things. Even after he was gone. Especially after he was gone. I cried then. Really cried. Not quiet tears, but the kind that shook my whole body. Grief and guilt and hope all tangled together until I couldn't tell which was which anymore. Joseph held me careful, like I was one of the storm-damaged plants. Precious, salvageable, worth the patient work of healing. I stood in the garden, Thomas and I planted, wearing another man's arms like shelter. The guilt should have destroyed me. Instead, I felt safe. When had safe become possible again? I'm not ready to make promises, I said finally, pulling back enough to see his face. Not yet. Don't want promises. His hand came up, wiped tears from my cheek with gentle fingers. Just want permission to stay a while longer. Help you expand the garden. Come spring, see where this grows. It might not grow into anything. Might not. He smiled slight. But you planted roses in a desert everyone said was impossible. I'm willing to bet on your stubborn hope. I laughed, watery and surprised. That's the worst romantic sentiment I've ever heard. I'll work on it. We stood in the garden together, neither moving away. Christmas Eve under stars, surrounded by impossible flowers. Two grieving people deciding that maybe survival wasn't enough. Maybe, carefully, we could try for living again. Maybe Thomas's love didn't die with him. Maybe it lived in every rose he'd helped me plant. Maybe it lived in my determination to keep growing things. Maybe it lived in my ability to recognize when life was offering me a second chance at partnership. Stay through spring, I said quietly. We'll see what blooms. His smile in the darkness felt like dawn. Christmas morning, I woke to Joseph already working in the garden. From my window, I watched him move among the plants with practiced ease, checking for frost damage, adjusting covers, working like a man who'd decided this was his garden too, not taking over, not presuming, just investing in a future. Our future. If I'd let it exist? The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it settled into my chest like warmth, like spring sun after a long winter. I made coffee for two without overthinking, set both plates without flinching. Noticed the shift in myself. When had this become natural? When had I reclaimed the right to set two places? Without guilt, memory came gentle this time. Not sharp Thomas's voice in my head. Not sad, but encouraging. Live, Alma. Find someone who sees what I saw in you. Don't waste your life being alone when you were made for partnership. I didn't know if that was memory or wishful thinking. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe both were true simultaneously. When Joseph came in, stamping cold from his boots, I handed him coffee and said the words before fear could stop me. I want you to stay. He went still, cup halfway to his mouth. Past spring. I nodded, held his gaze, made myself brave. Past spring, past summer, past however long this takes to figure out. Alma, I'm choosing this. The words came out firm. Sure. Maybe the first sure thing I'd said in a year. Not because I'm lonely, not because you're convenient, not because the town thinks I should or shouldn't. I took a breath. I'm choosing this because you see me as someone whole, not someone broken. Because you let me work through grief without rushing me. Because when I talk about Thomas, you listen like my past matters instead of threatening you. It does matter. He set down his coffee, moved closer. He made you who you are. And he'd want me to keep becoming. My throat was tight. You helped me do that. I can't promise it'll be easy. His voice was honest, raw. I'm still learning how to not drift. Still figuring out how to build instead of just passing through. Then we'll learn together. I reached out, took his hand. First time I'd initiated touch. First time I'd claimed what I wanted instead of waiting for it to be offered. Build something new, not to replace what we lost. but because we survived what we lost, and we're still here, still capable of growing things in harsh conditions. "Your roses," he said, smiling slight. "Our roses now." I squeezed his hand. "If you want them to be. I want everything to be ours." He pulled me close, careful still, always careful. "Garden, land, life, if you're sure." "I'm terrified," I admitted against his chest, "but I'm sure. Those aren't opposites." He kissed me then, gentle, careful, learning the shape of this new thing we were building. It wasn't the passion of first love, all urgency and discovery. It was something deeper, harder won. The kind of love that grew from shared survival and mutual respect. From two people who'd both lost everything and chose to risk loss again anyway. When we walked to church that morning, together, I felt the stares, heard the whispers, let them wash over me like wind through the garden troublesome. But not destructive. Not anymore. Mrs. Hartley approached after service, lips pressed thin with disapproval. "Alma, Mr. Marsh, I see you've made a decision." "I have." I stood straighter, met her eyes. "Joseph's staying. We're expanding the garden in spring. And Mrs. Hartley, my choices aren't subject to town approval." They never were. I walked away before she could respond. Joseph beside me, his hand at my back, supporting, not controlling, present, not possessive. That felt good. I admitted once we were out of earshot. Looked good, too. His voice held pride. "You're fierce when you've made up your mind." Had a good teacher. I glanced at the roses we passed, impossible blooms in harsh land. Roses don't apologize for blooming in impossible places. No, ma'am, they sure don't. That night, in the house that had been so quiet for so long, we planned the spring garden together. Where new roses would go, what varieties to try, which areas needed better drainage. 2 voices instead of 1. 2 sets of dreams instead of silence. I'd forgotten how good partnership sounded. How natural it felt when it was built on honesty instead of desperation. When it came from choice instead of need. I was choosing this. Choosing him. Choosing us. And it felt like the first real choice I'd made in a year. The first time I'd chosen living instead of just surviving. Watching him work in my garden from my window. I'd understood. This was a man investing in a future. Our future, the thought didn't terrify me anymore. It settled into my chest, like warmth, like spring sun after long winter. I'd spent a year believing choosing someone new meant erasing Thomas. Now I understood Thomas's love taught me how to love. That knowledge didn't die with him. It lived in me. Made me capable of recognizing good when I saw it again. Walking into town with Joseph beside me had felt like claiming myself back. Claiming my right to choose. To live. To bloom in impossible places, just like my roses. The desert still fought us on everything. But we fought back with patience, partnership, and the absolute certainty that beautiful things were worth the work. Especially in hard places. Especially in hard places. Spring came gentle that year. Joseph and I expanded the garden 30 new rose varieties, some from his Missouri home. Others from traveling merchants who'd heard about the impossible roses and wanted to see them for themselves. We worked side by side, learning each other's rhythms the way you learn a dance. Not perfect, but improving. Always improving. We moved through seasons like we moved through the garden, sometimes leading, sometimes following. Always paying attention to what needed tending. Some days were harder than others. Days I'd find myself crying over nothing, missing Thomas, with an ache that didn't fade just because I'd chosen to live again. Joseph never rushed those moments. Just gave me space and stayed near enough to be found when I was ready. Held my hand without asking questions. Let me grieve without making it about him. Some days he'd go silent, staring at nothing, lost somewhere I couldn't reach. I learned to recognize Ellen's ghost visiting. Learned to let him grieve without taking it personally. Without assuming his sadness meant he regretted choosing me. Our losses didn't compete. They coexisted, made room for each other the way we'd made room for each other. By summer, we married. Small ceremony, just the preacher and 2 witnesses Joseph knew from his ranching days. I wore blue, not white, carried roses from our garden, not bought flowers. Started this marriage honest about what we'd both survived. We didn't promise to make each other whole. We were already whole, just scarred. We promised to tend each other's scars carefully, to remember that healing wasn't linear, to be patient with the hard days. The town eventually accepted it, not because they approved, but because they got bored with disapproving. Mrs. Hartley still sniffed when she saw us, but even she admitted our garden was impressive, said it almost grudgingly. Like the words cost her something. People started asking advice. How to grow things in difficult conditions, how to make beauty in harsh places. I'd tell them what I learned. You work with what you have. You water consistently. You protect young growth from harsh winds. You don't give up when nothing blooms the first season. You trust that patient work eventually shows results. Same advice for grief. Really. For love after loss. For building anything worthwhile in hard places. 2 years after that first Christmas. Standing in a garden now famous across 3 counties. Joseph asked what I was thinking. That I'm glad the roses bloomed when you passed by. I said. Glad I said yes to help. Glad I chose to keep living instead of just surviving. Glad I stopped running. He pulled me close. Your stubborn hope saved me. Alma gave me permission to believe beautiful things could survive harsh conditions. We saved each other. I leaned into him. That's the truth of it. I gave you roots. You gave me hope. We stood there, surrounded by impossible flowers in unforgiving land. Proof that what everyone calls impossible is really just difficult. That patience and stubbornness and choosing to keep trying those things matter more than perfect conditions. I think about that first Christmas Eve sometimes. The terror of choosing. The fear that moving forward meant betraying the past. Now I understand love doesn't work that way. The heart doesn't replace, it expands. Makes room for both who we were and who we're becoming. Thomas's love didn't die with him. It lived in every rose he'd helped me plant. It lived in my determination to keep growing things. It lived in my ability to recognize when life was offering me a second chance at partnership. Joseph didn't replace Thomas. He became himself. Separate, different, equally valued. And me, I stopped being just Thomas's widow. Became Alma again. Woman who grows impossible things. Woman who chooses when to let people in. Woman who learned that grief and joy can coexist, like flowers and thorns on the same stem. The desert still fights us on everything. Wind, heat, stubborn soil. We fight back with patience, partnership, and the absolute certainty that beautiful things are worth the work, especially in hard places. I learned that from roses. I learned that from loss. I learned that from choosing love again when everyone said it was too soon. Sometimes the most beautiful blooms come unexpected, when you're not looking, when you've given up hoping, and sometimes they come exactly when you're finally ready to receive them. The desert taught me resilience. Thomas taught me love, Grief taught me strength. Joseph taught me that all of those things could coexist, that I could hold all of them simultaneously without breaking. And my roses, they taught me the most important lesson, with patience, stubbornness, and the courage to keep trying impossible things. Bloom. Every time.